We are in the throes of fall camp. It's one of the best times of year, Melissa, but we've got so many things to update you guys about. So let's just jump right in. This is the Frogs Insider Podcast. Let's hit that intro music. Welcome in, everybody, to the Frogs Insider Podcast. Jamie Plunkett here alongside Melissa Treebwasser, as always, breaking down another week of TCU fall camp. We've had 11 practices, Melissa, and I feel like we're getting to the point where as hesitant and as cautious as we should be to make grand assumptions based on what we're seeing, I think we are starting to really learn a little bit about this football team. So I'm excited to jump into that conversation with you tonight, talk about what we've seen with our very own two eyes this week. But first and foremost, a big shout out to the Republic of Football Network and Dave Campbell's Texas Football. We really enjoy being a part of this network. And if you go and you subscribe to the podcast feed this week, if you go search Republic of Football wherever you get your podcasts, click on the Texas Tech podcast, the Gambling Gauchos, and you will hear not only our good friends over at Gambling Gauchos, but you will also hear Melissa and myself as we hopped on over there across the network to chat a little bit about TCU to some Red Raider fans. So that was a fun adventure, Melissa.
Yeah.
They thought they could keep us to a solid half hour.
Yeah,
We
that
really
was cute.
showed them.
Yeah.
We really showed them.
Who do they think we are? No,
Exactly.
that's like one of the best parts about being a part of this network, right? Is the opportunity to jump on other people's shows. We'll have those guys on is when we preview the Texas Tech game, a couple months down the road. But other than the fact when my internet decided just to die in the middle of it, don't worry, guys, we got it fixed today. Thank you, Spectrum, for same-day service calls. But it was a blast. Those guys are a lot of fun, I enjoyed it. I know you enjoyed it, and we got to talk some frog football with the Red Raider fans. It was great.
I always have a good time talking to the Gambling Gauchos. They are wildly entertaining. Shout out to the folks who were watching that live stream who asked us about how to get tickets for the TCU Texas Tech
That was
football
outstanding.
game. Allowed me to go on a little bit of a ramble there. That was enjoyable.
So good. Worth the
but,
price of admission.
Absolutely, for sure. Also, watching Melissa get asked a very direct question about the run game and then freezing for a good 15 seconds before just leaving altogether was worth the price of admission as well. Fortunately,
And
we got to that.
not because I was afraid to answer direct questions about the run game. I was well prepared to answer the question, but I'm just assuming you did a great job in my stead. The episode just posted, so I haven't had a chance to listen to it.
Yes, I'll go back and listen to it as well so I can hear our greatness. But Melissa, let's start there. Let's jump into some fall camp conversation because I know how much TCU fans are craving this time of year, getting as much info as they can, and I know that because our download numbers are going crazy, just like they did last August, which is really fun to see. Everybody's coming back after a nice summer away. So if this is your first episode in quite some time, welcome back to the show. We're happy to have you back again. If you want to go back and listen to some of the episodes you missed, we had some really good stuff in there. Melissa sat down with Jacob Dyksterhouse, who covers men's tennis really closely, has had some great insight about TCU's national championship run there. Sat down with Emmanuel Miller a couple months ago as well to talk to him about what his next steps are now that he has graduated from TCU. Some really good content over the
Chatted
summer.
with quick interview with Eric Bell from last week as
Absolutely.
TCU women's soccer gets ready to kick off really not just their season but the entire TCU athletics season on Thursday night with the game against Alabama. So that's super fun. That is
Hosting the Tide.
Yeah, that is the first official athletics contest on campus for this year. So man, we're really just getting started. It's super exciting. I plan to be out there at that game on Thursday, so we'll be able to talk about the soccer gals as well as TCU football next week.
Pretty pumped about it. So, Justin, if you're listening, you already have probably subscribed to this channel, whether that's the Republic of Football Network or the Frogs Insider feed that is exclusively our TCU content. You can find either one of those wherever you get your podcasts. Go ahead and hit that subscribe, leave us a 5-star review. We really do appreciate it. And just make sure that you're getting over to the YouTube channel as well. Just search Frogs Insider on YouTube. We will pop up. We have a ton of really good videos, from interviews after practices to sights and sounds videos of fall camp. You can kind of get a little peek behind the curtain and see exactly what TCU football has been doing so far in fall camp. Pretty fun stuff there over at the YouTube channel, so make sure you're subscribed over there as well. I think we're at 369
Nice.
subscribers as of this recording. So that's a fun number for a variety of reasons.
Let's,
but Melissa,
let's get to 500.
let's get to 500. Oh yeah, you want to set the goal 500 subscribers on YouTube before the Stanford game? That gives us 18 days.
Yeah,
we can do that.
I feel like that's too small.
Easy. Let's do
500. Let's do 500, and if we get there, JB, what are we going to have you do for the people?
It's been a minute since I've done some sort of spice challenge.
I did bring up smelling salts the other day.
Ooh, are we going to do some smelling salts on the show? Are we going to do a live show smelling salt edition?
I think that might be the move. We get to 500 subscribers on the YouTube channel by August 29th. We'll hit the salts and do a live show sometime.
Or should we just make it kickoff of the TCU Stanford game?
Okay, by kickoff.
Kickoff of the Stanford game. If we're at 500 subscribers on the YouTube channel, Melissa and I will do smelling salts live on stream.
Yeah,
we'll make it happen.
Or maybe live in person somewhere. We've been throwing around some things. So.
We've been kicking some ideas around. Maybe getting the old live shows back going again. Miss our friends over at the pub. So
if you're listening, guys. Yeah.
Would be lovely. But for now, let's stick with the lovely information that has been coming out of fall camp for this past couple of practices, Melissa. I know that you've been on the ground, boots on the ground. I've been boots on the ground as well, watching these practices for the hour that media are allowed to be there and having conversations with all the folks post-practice as well. So let's just start with this question. What has been your biggest takeaway from fall camp so far?
Well, it's tough because I wasn't in town in 2022 or 2023 to watch fall camp, but I do think you could learn about how a team prepares based on how they play on Saturdays. And I will say that what we've seen out of camp, and it's so cliche, and I almost hate to say it, but it to me is the thing that stands out the most. The energy, the attitude is so different than how we saw this team perform a season ago, right? We keep hearing the guys talk about how competitive things are, how much they're willing to get after it, how different this camp feels compared to a year ago, especially from the defense. Josh Hoover, who is about as PC and as media trained as they come, even said when asked how the defense was different this year compared to last year, said there's not just guys running wide open in practice. So
he
did say that. It's not something we hear from him, but guys are there is we haven't really seen too many real skirmishes, but we've seen a lot of getting in guys' faces, a lot of getting after people, a lot of sideline, kind of stuff when they've gone team. There is a little bit more nastiness to this team than we saw last year, and I will say this, based on what we've seen the first 2 weeks, I don't expect them to come out flat against Stanford. I don't know what they'll look like in a team game, but I definitely think there's a lot more engagement, both from the players and the coaches. I think a lot of that has to do with having so many new staff members too. It's really hard to hide. You are working, or you are being coached up, or you are being yelled at by cause every second that we are out there for that first hour. And again, I wasn't there a year ago, but based on what we saw, I assume that was not what was happening on those fields last August.
There has definitely been a shift, I think, not only in energy, but in maturity from this football team. And I think that's something that Sonny Dykes and both of the coordinators have called out as well, is that this is a mature bunch. They do the little things the right way. They focus on the details. And while that doesn't necessarily equate to more wins on the football field, it does, I think, equate to being better prepared to play the game on Saturdays. And I think I go for all TCU folks when I say that's really kind of square one for what this team needed to get right about from 2023 was they needed to be more prepared. How many times, Melissa, did we hear about execution last year and the lack thereof, especially in key moments in the red zone, both offensively and defensively? This team does have a little bit of a different energy, a sense of more maturity about it. And I think a part of that is players are stepping up into more vocal leadership roles than they were a year ago. I think one of the things that I thought that I heard from Sonny Dykes that I found to be pretty wise is that last year this is something that he acknowledged. Last year he acknowledged that they didn't do as much as far as calling out specific players as leaders, pushing them to be leaders in the locker room, and really kind of holding their feet to the fire. The coaching staff took a step back, was more passive in their approach. So just like unintentional. To just let leaders kind of let the cream rise to the top, let the leaders kind of show themselves, help guide them along the way, but really truly let it be more player development, leadership development over the course of time. I think this year the biggest shift has been the coaching staff understands, hey, we don't have the time to allow that to occur as naturally as maybe we want it to. And so we've seen certain guys already stepping up. They were stepping up in spring, they were stepping up in OTAs, and they're stepping up in the fall. Josh Hoover being one, Dylan Wright being another, who we got to talk to earlier this week. Obviously, Johnny Hodges, Nnamdi Obi-Azor, Bud Clark on the defensive side of the football as well. There have been a lot of real vocal leaders that we've been able to witness in this first 11 fall camp practices that I've trying to not have revisionist history when I think back to 2023, but I just don't recall as much of that last year as I have seen so far this year.
Yeah, I think that, and again, because you really can compare them like for like, I think that's a very, very fair assessment of where this team is potentially stronger in the intangibles and the locker room versus where it was, and that complacency and frankly exhaustion. I mean, I don't want to do this to you right now because I know this is a little sensitive for you, but I think they've got the gray shear, but we've watched what happened with the Rangers, right? And how great they were in getting to, now they won the World Series, they got to the pinnacle, but so many of those guys, I read an article on Jonah Heim and how much he has fallen off, and especially with the catcher. We saw this probably with Carson Bowen, part of his slump early in the season too, is there's so much additional wear and tear, not just physically, but mentally and emotionally when you play that deep into a season. And I think that impacted the coaches, and to some degree probably the players, and it's not an excuse because 5-7, like you said, on Gambling Gotchas yesterday, there's only 2 teams in history that have failed to reach a bowl after playing for the national championship. So a lot of programs have been able to overcome that. But I think for Sonny, because it was so unexpected, he was not prepared for what that next season might look like coming off of that appearance. So I'm glad to see how I will say I had so many thoughts about Andy Avalos, the person, right, coming in and the bag. And Todd Graham the same way, just based on what we've heard. I have been so impressed and encouraged by how detail-oriented, how positively energetic, like he gets after guys, but he gets after them, and then he goes and to watch him sit there and like very detailed, very specific, hone in on like the smallest aspect of how he wants these guys to explode off the line or do their swim move or hit the force impact. Like, it's really exciting to see the care and the detail that is being done on both sides of the football this year. And you hope with that added maturity that you mentioned that does translate into results on Saturday.
Yeah, I think, I've had, in talking to Sonny and Kendall Briles and Andy Avalos, we've, as we sat down with them from media availability, one of the questions that I asked all 3 of them was, hey, with the rule change this summer about who's allowed to actually do hands-on coaching, how has that impacted the way you're running fall camp? Has that made you more efficient? What has that allowed you to do? And I thought all 3 of their answers were pretty varied but equally profound insofar as and for those that don't know, there was a rule change this summer. Previously, you were limited to you had to either be an assistant coach, a head coach, or a graduate assistant to coach players from a hands-on perspective. That means actually get in front of a player and give them instruction. You had to be in a specific role. That rule changed this year and expanded to quality control folks, other staffers as well. So you've got QCs now, and just staffs have expanded. We've seen that at TCU. You already mentioned it. So there are so many more coaches now that are capable of sitting down with a player and giving them individualized instruction at any given moment in these camps that we're seeing drills run differently. We're seeing new drills run altogether. We're seeing guys like Julius Lewis, the corners GA, be able to give hands-on instruction to some of these corners and safeties in the middle of team Whereas prior, okay, well, if a guy's going to get instruction on a rep that went right or wrong, that meant that Paul Gonzalez or Andy Avalos or Carlton Buckles was going to have to come over to the sideline and stop paying attention to team to give some more one-on-one instruction, or the instruction was going to have to happen at a later time. Now they have the flexibility and the personnel from a coaching perspective to be able to take care of all of those little things while the people who need to be focused on the big picture can still focus on the big picture. And I just think that Sonny's approach to that this fall camp has been a really nice shift to see, because he has never had to take his eyes off of what's happening big picture wise. And part of that is trust. We talked about the importance of trusting your people. I think he really trusts this coaching staff. That's evident in the way that practices are being run. That's evident in the way the assistant coaches have passed on, or the coordinators have passed on things to the assistants down to the GAs and the QCs. It's a well-oiled machine out there. They get a lot done in those 18 periods of fall camp every day. And I think that's probably my biggest takeaway, is just the efficiency and the amount of ground they've been able to cover in these 11 practices. It feels like they've already put in 20 or 25 practices based on the amount of stuff they've covered. I mean, Andy Avalos told us the other day he's 95% installed on his defense.
95 to 93.
95 to 93.
Not 93 to 95.
I don't want to talk about the way he does percentages, because it threw me for a little bit of a loop. I expected him to go up.
No,
he didn't.
He went down.
He zigged where I thought he was going to zag.
Yeah. Okay. Keep us on our toes, just like
hey, I'm here for
offenses.
it.
Yeah.
And he's already started working on Stanford. Josh Hoover said the other day that they've already started watching film on Stanford's defense. So this has given the team an opportunity to be ahead mentally of where I think they typically would have been at this point in fall camp. So that's the same for every team. So it's not like TCU has a different kind of advantage over the people they'll be playing this year. But I do think the way coaches approach this new rule, we'll see whose version of implementing changes around this rule wins out in the end, I think, based on performances on the field.
Well, I think where there's a real advantage, like you mentioned, everybody gets to do this now, but for a team that's putting in a completely new system on one side of the ball, I think that's where it might be advantageous, because whereas like instead of being 95 to 93% installed, normally at this point in camp he's probably closer. I think he said he was closer to like the 60-70% in a normal year. And so the advantage of having so many hands-on guys, especially guys like you mentioned, watching Jay Lou coach guys up on the sidelines, so freaking cool.
It's very fun.
He's so cool, and he's so his energy. That dude is going to be a hell of a football coach. Like he already is. But if he gets an opportunity to get into like a titled role, he does everything right. It seems like. I'm so fired up, and the guys love him. You could really tell. So yeah, I think it's a big deal. I think that's a great point, that there are so many more guys that it allows the coordinators to not just have to see the big picture, which they can still do effectively, but also to have the opportunity to dive in to some of the minutia that they wouldn't normally be able to do without sacrificing something else. It's very, very cool.
Yes, and speaking of diving into the minutia, Melissa, you teed it up perfectly. Let's jump into some of the details that we've been seeing in fall camp through these first 11 practices. Let's start along the offensive line, because I think you and I are aligned in feeling like this is probably still one of the bigger question marks for this team where they stand currently. Obviously, we know Cade Bennett, the left guard transfer from San Diego State, is going to miss this year. He's got a disc issue in his back that he's having surgery on. He will still have 2 years of eligibility remaining after that, but he's not going to be available this year, which means TCU has been using Remington Strickland as their starting left guard for the majority of camp. Colton Deary, James Brockermeyer have both been taking snaps at center with the ones. Carson Bruno's been pretty locked in as the right guard. I think he's had a pretty good fall camp. Bless Harris at left tackle, Michael Nichols at right tackle. We know, too, that the sands maybe are shifting a little bit, but let's start with this. Friday night scrimmage, we got to see real full pads hitting each other good on good, and the offensive line struggled at times. They struggled specifically in pass protection, and they struggled, I think, at a specific position. But Melissa, before I dive into that, what were your takeaways on the O-line on Friday night?
I mean, frankly, we saw Josh Hoover run more in Friday scrimmage than I think we did in all 6 or 7 games that he played last year. I'm sure some of that is him being more confident to take off and having the freedom to do so. But a lot of that was he was kind of running for his life at times. We even saw Ken Seals, who I don't expect to have many designed runs drawn up for if he is inserted into the game, have to take off and run quite a bit. The run blocking looks so much better than it did a season ago. I think that might be a real strength for this unit. But we've talked about this, I feel like, ad nauseum, and everywhere else that we've been asked anything about TCU football. When you are replacing, you mentioned those kind of 6 guys competing for 5 spots right now. How many of those guys are born and bred Horned Frogs? 1. Right? One guy that has been, grown up in this program to any degree. The other 5 of them are transfers. And 2 of them are transfers with pretty significant injury histories. And so these are guys that have not played a lot of football on game day. And then you bring in all of these new faces, and the unit that probably takes the most chemistry in college football is the offensive line, and it's going to take time to develop. Now, am I disappointed that they haven't figured that out 11 practices in? No, I think that's to be expected. But, as practice closes to the media next week, you would hope that that's where they really start to pull things together. So I think that as a whole, they're still not operating as one unit. They're not operating like that kind of amoeba that you want to see them all moving as one and kind of, anticipating together. And I think it's made things really hard on Josh Hoover. The passing game, as talented as the wide receivers are, the passing game has not looked great. I don't remember if you mentioned this last night on our last podcast, but you said this earlier, the one-on-ones, the receivers look awesome. But when you get into that team situation, it's a different game. They've had to kind of get down to their checkdowns a lot, that we've seen in practice and we saw on Friday night in the scrimmage. And it's definitely concerning. The other part of that is you named off 6 guys. I think there's a pretty big drop-off after those 6 guys when you start to talk about, if injuries do. I mean, I think we've seen some good things out of Ben Taylor-Whitfield and
Cooper Powers at left guard.
Yeah, Cooper Powers
right.
looked pretty decent. But it's still, Sonny said this every year. He wants to come into game 1 with 8 guys. I don't think TCU has 8 guys quite yet. So it's still a work in progress. Yeah. But and also, as say that, let's give some credit. The defensive line has been a lot different.
Yeah.
And the blitzes and the places they're coming from, and they never know where that is absolutely partial credit to they've made it really, really hard on the O-line, which is exactly what you want to happen, at this point in fall camp.
Yeah, it's the old iron sharpens iron adage, which we thought we were seeing in 2023. That wasn't really the case. So hopefully what our eyes are telling us this time around is telling us more of the truth. I will note, too, the last couple of practices, left guard has probably been the biggest question mark with Bennett going down with that injury. Like I said, Remington Strickland has been getting most of the first team snaps at left guard. The last couple of practices, though, since that Friday scrimmage, we have seen Colton Deary start taking more snaps at left guard as well. And if you recall, if you go to the YouTube channel, folks, and you watch Sonny Dykes' last interview that he did, he talked a little bit about, he could see a world where Brockermeyer and Deary both find starting roles along this offensive line, even though they had been competing for that starting center job. So we're starting to see that shift. They looked much better and much more cohesive on Monday in practice. Josh Hoover went 3 for 3 in their first team session that was open to the media. No big explosive plays, but a lot of really good completions downfield, 10 to 12 yard gain with Dylan Wright, another 7-8 yard gain with Savion Williams, some really good runs from both Cam Cook and Trey Sanders. So it looked like the offense maybe got back a little bit at the defense after the last few days of practice, where it really looked like the defense had been winning out. So, and to your point too about Sonny Dykes liking to have 8 guys. Really, I think they're getting close. I do. Obviously Cade Bennett was supposed to be one of those guys, and he's out. So if you think about the 6 that they've got right now, okay, well, they really could be at 7, and then they're just looking for one more. I do think Quentin Harris has looked pretty good in the backup tackle role. I think that Cooper Powers, like we mentioned already, Robbie Rochester has looked all right as the right guard backup. I think there's some talent there. The real question is, 4 of these guys were in the transfer portal 4 months ago, and a good portion of these guys haven't seen a ton of football snaps, right? I mean, Bruno has a ton of snaps under his belt. Deary has a good amount of snaps under his belt. Bless Harris has some. He's been banged up at Florida State. Mike Nichols has some, but hasn't really seen a ton of time. James Brockermeyer's seen some, but hasn't seen a ton of time.
Yeah.
Same with Robbie Rochester, same with Cooper Powers. So same with Remington Strickland from Texas A&M as well. And so you've got a lot of guys that I know the staff really likes and that they've seen a lot of progress from. But to quote the good old Ron Washington, you never know what the booty hole's going to do. And that first game, Friday night in Stanford, what's this offensive line going to look like? How are they going to respond to live fire? So I think that's one of the bigger question marks that we still have yet to answer in fall camp. But I do like the progress that the offensive line has been making over the course of these 11 practices. I think they've made some really good strides along the way. Like you mentioned, Melissa, the run blocking has been really good against an aggressive, very strong defensive front that Andy Avalos is putting out there. Part of the reason is for the offensive blocking. But another part of the reason is for one of your favorite up-and-coming players in Cameron Cook, along with Trey Sanders and, Jeremy Payne, since he stepped on campus, has been a firecracker. They just got Dominic Williams in from the portal out of Arkansas, and then obviously the other freshman, Nate Palmer, as well, who's been here since spring. We were asking this question in the spring, hey, should they go get another running back? Well, they did in Dominic Johnson, but we can also start to see now, Melissa, why they have so much confidence in Cam Cook.
He looks like the guy that this team needs in order to have a successful run game. I love the way that he finds the gap, he hits the hole correctly, he seems to make the right decision most of the time. And then the thing that he has that maybe we didn't see enough of last year is he's got runaway speed. He can really get by guys. He can accelerate. He's not afraid of contact. He's got a great humility about him, but also a confidence and a swagger. Really enjoyed talking to him last week. I loved his presence. He's just a very kind of quiet, composed guy. He reminds me in attitude a lot of Kendre Miller. Of just kind of that he's gonna let his play do the talking for the most part, but he's not afraid to get up after making a big run or taking a little bit of a hit, bouncing off the tackle, and say a little something too. So he has a ton of confidence in himself, but the thing that has really impressed me is the confidence that his team has in him. For a young guy that has so little experience, every player that we've asked about him, and it isn't just the platitudes. You can see their demeanor change. Oh, Cam Cook is a dog. Oh, he's a dude. Kendall Briles said he's a real guy. Just the everybody seems to really have a ton of confidence in what he's able to do on the field. And obviously it's the same thing. I don't want to say the Ron Washington quote that you just quoted again, but it's one thing to do it consistently in practice, and he has done it very consistently in practice. He is very obviously the designated starter at this point in fall camp, and I don't anticipate that changing before September or August 30th. But it will be a different story on Friday night in Palo Alto against a really, really solid Stanford defense. But that being said, if the line can continue to do what it's done well, and that is create holes, I have every confidence he's going to hit that hole and accelerate through it.
And I think behind him too, I think TCU fans can be more confident in Trey Sanders as well this year. He played at about 218 last year. He's slimmed down. He's about 208, 210 now. I almost didn't recognize him the first time I saw him at fall camp because he'd slimmed down so much since the spring. And I was talking to someone, and they said, yeah, we think he's down to around 208, and he's got some absolute burst now. And we got to see that on Friday night. He snapped off a 60-yard run. The only reason that he didn't score a touchdown was because he slid down at the 5-yard line. I think they were doing some situational stuff. It was
you talk about not recognizing him. I had to look at that number like 3 different times, be like, what? That was true. Okay, all right. It was. His speed has been shocking so far,
and not just in the run game, but in the passing game as well. We've seen him go. Not to give too much away, because if we're telling you, we're telling Stanford, because they are obviously listening, Melissa, with your connections to that program. But that wheel route, he looks pretty good running that wheel route. He looks pretty good out in the flat. I think that we're going to see a really nice bit of diversity from the running back group this fall, and that will be a nice refresher coming off of a season where Amani Bailey did everything he could. Right, he ran for 1,200 yards. He was a grinder. But I think we're going to see more versatility from the running backs this time around this year.
Yeah, well, and I think the biggest thing is, Amani was put in so many bad situations, but I have a lot more confidence this year if we're 3rd and 2 or, second and goal from the 6, and we need to run the ball in. And that's not just to talk about the running backs. That's just talk about the scheme and the offensive line and how they're operating and how they're impacting the run game in that aspect. I think it's been overwhelmingly positive so far. But, again, I think a run defense is always slower to come together than a pass defense and a new defensive scheme, right? Like, I think that is more of a repetition type thing. And so I'm happy with where the run game is right now. And like you said, I think the depth in that room is really exciting. Dominique Johnson just showed up. We've seen him do some really nice things too. He hasn't had a ton of opportunities, but he looks like he very could get 3 to 5 snaps a game and be really effective. I would not be surprised at all to see Trey get instead of the couple of carries a game he got, but to get more in that kind of 6 to 8 range. But Cam Cook can be a guy, if he needs to carry the rock 30 times, I think he can do it. If he needs to share and do it 15 to 16, I think he can be super effective in that role too.
Yeah, if you think back to the splits that Kendre and Amari had in 2022, I think we could see something similar where it's really, instead of a 50-50 share, more of a 70-30 share between Cam and Trey with, or 65-25 with the extra however many percentiles I just left out there, 10% going to Dominic and Jeremy Payne and Trent Battle and Nate Palmer as well.
Trent Battle's another guy that, if he can be out there is pretty.
He's a tough MFer.
Versatile.
He's a strong dude. He is not afraid of contact. A little banged up right now, but I think the staff is fully expecting him to be ready and healthy and raring to go. So, just another piece in that running back room that adds depth and talent. And you want to talk about guy? You were asking this question about the offensive line, Melissa. Who of these guys are lifelong Horned Frogs? Trent Battle is the guy.
Yeah.
Right? And Cam Cook to an extent, but he's only been here a year and a half. But I mean, Trent Battle's entering year 3. And has just been a grinder.
Wow. Yeah.
Been a grinder. He's been working his tail off as a huge piece of the special teams. And I can't remember who was saying it, but someone was talking about Trent Battle in a press conference a couple weeks ago, just talking about how he doesn't get the credit he deserves for all the work he does for this team. I think it might have been Bless Harris. Was talking about him and just is singing his praises. So Trent Battle's another guy to think about too when you think about the running backs. All right, let's move on. Everybody has been asking for the last 11 practices, how does Josh Hoover look? And Melissa, how has Josh Hoover looked?
Again, I think it's difficult to put too much of an assessment on things because, we've seen him in one scrimmage and I don't think he really, I'll say it this way. There was one moment where he got time in the pocket and he threw an absolute dart. He had a chance to go through his reads, and even the official was like, "Oh, they gave him time, and look what he did," kind of a thing, and that was super funny. When it's very much looked like when he has time, he's making the right reads, he's putting the ball accurately where it needs to be. He definitely, I think, has the arm strength. He can make all the throws, to use the cliche, right? Like we've seen him whip it out on an out route. We've seen the deep ball still needs some work. His is not the best deep ball in fall camp, I don't think, but it's not far off. But I think he's really seemed to take to heart what Sonny Dykes has told him, and that don't always be the hero. Like sometimes you got to take what's given to you. And I think he's really managed his desire to want to make a big play with his desire to want to win football games, and it seems like he's doing things right. There's going to be, I think, a couple times he's taken off and run a little bit too quickly, that he's got to sit in that pocket, but as it's collapsing around him, that can be difficult he's still a very young quarterback, for a young quarterback to do. But the way he's carrying himself, the trust and confidence his teammates have in him, I think just really leaps off the field. Those guys play hard for him. And so I think if he is given an opportunity to go through his progressions, I think he's going to be super successful. He's accurate. But I think there's still been some struggles in the red zone with him being able to get the ball out on time, and part of that is because he's not able to just sit comfortably in the pocket. But he's stepping up. He's climbing the pocket the way that you want him to do. He seems like his footwork has been really, really good. And when he's had to take off and run a little bit, he looks effective. Right, like he's not going to be Max or even Haas for that regard, but he looks really effective in taking advantage of open field in front of him.
Yeah, I agree. The conversation with him, like you said, has been finding that balance between fearlessness and efficiency, and he has, for the most part, made the efficiency decision in the moment, which I think is really nice to see, especially when you consider. His comments after the scrimmage, you mentioned him already tonight. He said this is a much different defense that he's going up against this fall camp than a season ago. I think the quote was, there aren't guys running around wide open like last year. And so the pressure that he's facing in fall camp, I think, is much more realistic to what he will be seeing in game situations than he was ever prepared to do last year. And he performed admirably last year.
Yeah.
So I think another year of the playbook under his belt, another year of maturity under his belt, the OTAs to catch up for lost time when he missed all of spring, to get on the same page with his receivers. I think that we're in line to see Josh Hoover take a step forward this season at the quarterback position. Now, like you said, they got to block for him, and that's still something to be seen. But I think when he has time, he has largely been a very efficient, capable QB1 for this football team.
Yeah, I am confident that Josh Hoover, if everything else goes right, is good enough to take TCU to a Big 12 championship, right? Like, I'm not saying I think TCU will be in the Big 12 championship, but I think he's definitely a good enough quarterback to lead this team to the top of the conference. But he can't do it on his own. I'm hoping they don't ask him to do it on his own. I don't want to see him throw for 54 passes a game. I don't think that's TCU's path to success. But I am confident that if put in a position where they need to put the game on his shoulders, that he can do it. That he's a good enough quarterback to do it. But I also don't think that asking him to do that is the best way for TCU to ultimately be successful.
Well, I think, part of the reason we saw him throwing so much last year was defensively the struggles were putting TCU behind the 8 ball. They were chasing most of the year last year, and the deficiencies in the running game. You couldn't expect this team to get off the blocks like they needed to in those short down situations, which is why we saw a lot of 3rd and 2 and 3rd and 3 passing last year, which frustrated everybody, including the coaching staff. And so, when you consider the perceived improvement in the run game that we can hopefully look forward to this year, that will likely impact play calling. And maybe we'll see a more balanced offense out of Kendall Briles this year than we did a season ago. And that'll, like you said, that'll take pressure off of everybody if the run game can be efficient.
Yeah, and it's so symbiotic, right? Amazing how football works like that.
It's like a whole ecosystem out there on the field.
It really is.
Speaking of ecosystems, we can't talk about the offense and neglect the defense, Melissa. So let's talk. You've already kind of given your flowers to Andy Avalos on this episode, talking about how hands-on he is, how detail-oriented he is. But realistically, the defensive front, we're going to start here. That front 4 down lineman has been probably one of the more impressive units for me through these 11 fall practices. When you've got Devin Deal and Cooper McDonald working at that stud position. You've got Nana Safamensa at that edge position on the other side. And then Tymon Mitchell is probably my star of fall camp so far. He's been an absolute haymaker on the interior of that defensive line. Caleb Fox has been really, really nice to watch, moving back inside from that edge position he played last year in the 3 down lineman. And again, we've critiqued the offensive line, so keeping that in mind, I have really liked what I've seen from the defensive line, not only in a disrupt the passing game from that perspective, but also there have been a lot of moments where they've stuffed the run pretty nicely. And so my takeaway defensively is that this D-line, I think, is going to be much improved from a season ago.
Yeah, I think that's completely fair. I think the athleticism of that group, I think that the IQ that they play with is really good, and also just the competitiveness there. Those are some fiery, nasty dudes when the helmets go on. They like we've talked to Caleb Fox, just one of the nicest, just sweetest young men around. And that dude, like, I would not want to line up against him. He gets after it. He's pretty nasty. And like you said, I think Cooper McDonald, Devin Deal, like that rotation, be able to keep those guys fresh, because I don't think there's a drop off going from one to the other, and so I think they can really cause some havoc and be really problematic for opposing offenses. But to me, it's just when you hear these guys talk about what this scheme looks like, just the way it's going to potentially confuse opponents, especially early on when there's not a whole lot of film on it, I think could be really, really exciting. And I think we're going to see things, on that Friday night against Stanford that we haven't seen in a long time from a TCU defense, as far as just the element of surprise, the element of confusion. There's so many guys, like we haven't even mentioned Marcel Brooks, who, is not running with the ones, but he's a guy that if you deploy him correctly can really be a problem. And it feels like Andy Avalos knows how to do that and where he's going to be used, and guys like him can be used and be effective.
Yeah, absolutely. And you talk about getting more of those like impact players on the field at a time. On Monday morning, we saw something that we hadn't seen yet, and that was two studs out there at the same time. And so you had Cooper McDonald and Devin Deal running with the ones. You had Jonathan Bax and Marcel Brooks running with the twos. And you just talk about that foursome from a stud position where it's that hybrid edge linebacker spot. That's a deep position group, just those four guys. And the room goes even deeper than that. And so finding ways to get your playmakers on the field, it seems like Andy Avalos is starting to experiment with that a little bit. And then inside as well, I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about Zach Chapman and Marquise Steele, because they have been the twos at that interior defensive line spot behind Fox and Mitchell, and they've also done an admirable job. So it looks like the rotation is going to be there for this team, because make no mistake about it, you can talk about ones and twos, but the reality is all of these guys are going to see significant snaps on Saturdays, and they've all got to be prepared to go. That's how defensive lines are at their best, is when guys can get rest and stay fresh for the fourth quarter. And it feels like at this moment, TCU has the depth to set themselves up for success along the defensive line late in games.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, when TCU has been at its best defensively, it's because they've been able to rotate. I mean, that was a huge hallmark under Gary Patterson, and especially Dick Bumpus is being able to. I confused Dick Bumpus and Dick Buttkiss, and I made it Dick Bunt. I don't know. Whatever.
It almost sounded like a dirty word.
Yeah, it really did. But yeah, I mean, fresh legs are problems, because you don't want your offensive line to be rotating in and out a lot. So if the defense is coming at you with fresh legs for 4 quarters, that could be really, really exciting if it's your defense doing so.
We had a chance to sit down with Johnny Hodges earlier this week, talk a little bit about the linebacker position, the chaos he's been causing in fall camp. Between him and Nnamdi Obiezor, who has been the most consistent linebacker running with the ones this fall, Caleb Elarms-Orr, you've got Terrence Cooks back in the mix, who was out all of last season with a knee injury. You've got oh my gosh, so many different guys out there. Max Carroll's been running with the twos a little bit at linebacker as well. It feels like a really fun defensive little linebackers room there. They've been flying around and getting after the football. Johnny Hodges, I said, looks like now I'm forgetting the old Oklahoma 80s.
Oh, Brian Bosworth.
Thank you. He looks a little bit like the Boz with the bleached hair.
Yeah.
You got him to talk about the genesis behind the blonde hair when we talked to him, and I thought he gave you a fun little nugget there.
Yeah, that was Steven.
Well.
Gotta give credit to Steven Johnson.
Right, shout out to Steven Johnson.
I was going to ask the question, but Steven beat me to it. He talked about how it was it's for the boys, and he always does something different. It was the shaved head in 2022.
I believe the phrase he used was to get the boys excited, which was
to get the
just
boys
a very
excited.
fun turn of phrase when talking about hair color.
And he talked about how Joe Burrow kind of did the same thing, and then he said that the plan was to dye it purple, and he said he didn't think it was going to be a good look. I think he chickened out. I wasn't going to say that to his face, but
Joe Burrow gave him some cover, because he did say the day before he was going to do it, he saw Burrow come out with the blonde hair, and so he did pivot to the blonde hair as an homage to the Bengals quarterback.
Yeah.
It's ironic, Melissa, that a guy who is going to be hopefully hitting a ton of quarterbacks this year styled his hair after one.
Yeah.
Maybe it's a little reminder of, if I get close enough to them, maybe they'll my bleached hair will transfer to them and they'll think they're Joe Burrow. I don't know where I was going with that. I should have just shut the hell up. Let's move on to the secondary. Oh, it's late.
Oh, God.
It's late, and unfortunately, it's a school night.
Yeah,
for everybody.
God, for both of us. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
And I don't like the secondary is like we struggling talking through the O line. The secondary is really hurting right now.
The cornerback spot, I think, is still a little bit of a question mark. I feel comfortable with who they've got at safety, frankly. But no Avery Helm, no Vernon Glover for the last week or so. They're down with injuries right now. Sonny, in his last media availability, said that they were both, quote, banged up. And they were hopeful to get them back at some point. They don't know exactly what that timeline looks like right now. And so in their stead, we've seen a lot of JT Broughton and a lot of Lamarian James at corner. They've been running with the ones. And they've looked solid. This is why you bring in transfers, is so that you have depth at these positions. Lamarian had a great season at Old Dominion last year. JT Broughton has experience at Utah, won a Pac-12 championship, 2 Pac-12 championships with them, right? So you've got depth at that position. It's being tested a little bit in fall camp, which you never really want to see. But between the two of them, then you have Channing Canada and Javon McIver running with the twos. Jordan Lester has been getting some run. Richard Toney didn't practice on Monday, but he's been getting some run at corner as well. You've still got some talent at that position. It's starting to sort itself out in the absence of Helm and Glover. But yeah, I think it's safe to say that cornerback is the biggest question mark on the defense at this point in time, similar to the offensive line. Safety, though, I like where this safety group is at, Melissa.
Yeah, I think that there's depth, there's dynamic, just athleticism in that group. There is a very, very high football IQ. I think it was Todd Graham talking about what a joy Bud Clark is to coach because he brings.
It was Avalos, yeah.
It was Avalos. Okay, I couldn't remember if it was Todd or Avalos. It wouldn't have been Todd because it would have been Dana, which I don't think Dana was talking about Bud Clark. But Avalos talked about just what a joy is, not just because he constantly has the right energy. He comes to practice every day excited to be playing football. But he said that his football IQ has grown so tremendously over the last several months, and that not just his overall growth and understanding the game of football, but specifically understanding his role in this defense and how this defense is meant to attack. I mean, he won't be the guy with the green dot, but he will certainly be, I think, the leader in the secondary, the coach in the secondary, and then making sure that everybody gets lined up. And, I think we saw Bud's energy and his leadership was so important in 2022, and he fell off, I think, a little bit last year, not just in his on-the-field play where he struggled, but his energy wasn't the same. He was not the same guy on the sidelines last year either. And I think we've definitely seen the return to form. When that helmet is off, that man does not have a smile on his face. Mm-hmm. But when that helmet goes on, I mean, he is getting after his teammates. He is holding guys accountable. He's getting in guys' faces to coaching them up in a positive way. And you can really tell how much some of those younger guys and some of those transfers are looking to him to make sure they're doing things the right way and to understand the culture of this program. And but I love Bud. I've loved Bud since he arrived on campus. It's really, really fun to see him looking like he's very, very himself, at fall camp this year. And I think that's super important.
Yeah, his maturity is at another level, but he hasn't lost that energy and that love for the game, which I think is really great to see. And then you pair him with 2 veteran guys, one who's been here for as long as him and Abe Kamara, and another who got here from Memphis in the spring and immediately won the other safety job in Cam Smith. He looks phenomenal.
Cam looks great.
So you've got a really strong, solid, 3 safeties, on that first string, and then you've still got Jamel Johnson, who came on as a true freshman last year and played incredibly well, who's earning some time with the ones as well. Austin Jordan has been getting a lot of reps with the 2s, and Jace Oliver, the Tulsa transfer, has also been looking really good with the 2s
really good
as
too.
well. So I really do feel like you can talk about 6 deep at safety, and there's not a ton of drop-off. So I think that there's a way maybe to mitigate some of the questions about corner with what you can do with your safeties. Granted, I think the biggest takeaway defensively has truly been the fact that this secondary has not had to cover for as long.
Yeah.
And that as much as anything else is going to be a huge impact on how effective this defense can be when the season starts, Melissa. And so overall, I think the defense is in a really good spot. We've seen them have a lot of success against this offense. And I think that the depth at a lot of these positions is way, way better than it was a season ago.
Now, I will say going into week 1 in the top game, potentially playing the best wide receiver that they're going to see all season with your 2 top cornerbacks out is not ideal. But at the same token, I think you're right. I think that, and I think one thing we will see Andy Avalos do that maybe we didn't see the last couple of years is make adjustments on the fly. And I think if they need to throw a safety over the top, Eric Aliomar, I'm not sure I'm saying that correctly, then we'll see a lot more of that. Like I think that he will find creative ways to try to make sure that one dude doesn't beat him. And I know it's very rare that you can say one dude will beat you from the wide receiver position, but we saw him do that to Colorado last year. So that dude
and he looked fantastic in the second half of that game. He asked, and that was not a slouch of a cornerback on him either.
No.
Travis Hunter's a damn good football player. TCU fans will remember, and I think he finished with like over 200 yards receiving and a handful of touchdowns in that game.
Including one of the biggest just little brother moments.
He absolutely mossed Travis Hunter.
It was cool.
Sure did.
But overall, I'm very, very happy with where the defense is right now. I'm really excited about it, and they're going if nothing, there's going to be some struggles. I don't think this is going to be the top defense in the Big 12, not because the talent's not there, not because the scheme's right there, but it's going to take some time. And I think when you look at some of the early offenses that they're facing, Stanford isn't necessarily going to be a, run and gun kind of a situation. Although Troy Taylor does absolutely have that in his arsenal, and I would not be shocked to see them throw the ball around a lot more than we're expecting. But when you look at UCF, when you look at SMU, and some of these early games, you're going to really get tested in that secondary. And so it's going to be super important, like you mentioned, that the quarterback does not have a ton of time to throw. And the pressure really does do its job. And then also that the safeties are making sure that we're not leaving those corners out on an island, and it'll be interesting too, because I think we're going to see a lot of safety play up at the line. I think we're going to see a lot of blitzing from the secondary. So Avalos is really going to have his work cut out for him. It depend with the injury status of Helm and Glover, TBD. There's been no official announcements on how long they're out, but that can certainly impact how successful TCU's defense is overall. But it's got to be a next man up. It's fall camp. I mean, the injuries are a part of it. Unfortunately, we've seen a couple teams in state lose really, really big, important players on both sides of the ball already. So you've got to adjust. You've got to figure it out, and you've got to get guys coached up and ready to play.
You do, and that's what the rest of fall camp's going to be like. We have a couple more days of availability where we'll be able to go and watch practice. I think that's Tuesday night, Thursday, and Friday are the last 3 practices that will partially be open to the media. And then they're shutting down access, and they're getting ready for Stanford, which means that we are getting ever closer to college football season. This is the last Saturday ahead of us, Melissa, without college football until January 26th
Beautiful
of 2025. Very excited about that. Next week on the show, we are going to be taking your hot takes about TCU football in 2024. So you'll see us put out a call this week on social media. We'll put out a call on Horned Frog Blitz as well. We want to hear your hottest TCU football take for 2024. We will read it on the show next week, and we will talk about it all then. But for now, make sure you're subscribed wherever you get your podcasts. Hit the subscribe button on that YouTube channel as well. Let's get to 500 before kickoff against Stanford so I can do smelling salts and cry and probably poop my pants live on stream. It's going to be great.
That might cost us some subscriptions if you do that. But I'm here for it. I'm here for it.
I would rather eat something extraordinarily spicy than do smelling salts, so I'll do smelling salts. We'll do that. Okay? And it'll be great.
This is why we love you, Jamie. This is why we support you.
I mean, you're going to do it too, though, right? You did say that. You did
say
I'll
you
were
going
to do it too.
I've never done. I have no idea what to expect. So
it's not good.
Okay.
It's not good. It's not fun. It's not enjoyable. And we're going to do it for the people because that's what the people need.
That's what we do.
This has been the Frogs Insider Podcast. She is Melissa Treebwasser. I am Jamie Plunkett. We will talk to you next time when we talk about your hot takes. But until then, go Frogs.
Go Frogs.